That's confusing. That's very confusing, right? Wow, this has really been reviewed everywhere. Title, no. Cover, no. Don't know the author. Here's the situation. First of all, I'm Jennifer. I'm basically a Swiss Army knife of a book person, and I don't know how I feel about new releases anymore. So second of all, here's the situation. I'm going to talk about why I used to read a lot of new releases, what changed, and then we're going to go through the top books of 2024. I wanted to try to capture in real time what it's like for me to process this. This isn't a video bashing or belittling current books. The American publishing scene alone is so dynamic. We're living in such a vibrant period of literary output. So I do understand, but don't relate to this idea that I won't touch any book unless it stood the test of time. Because it's like, but isn't it cool and delightfully random that you live in this specific time and get to read these books that people before you couldn't? Equally, when people make these blanket statements of, well, I'm just not that interested in classics, it's like you're not interested in any story or thought that anyone committed to paper before 1950? Had to pick a year before my parents were born. I think that's probably not true for most people, and if it is true, yikes. All to say, in my reading, I'm interested in a mixture. So here's a brief recap of my contemporary reading. When I graduated from college with a lit degree, like a lot of people, I'd mostly read classics, loved it, but I was aware that I didn't even know where to start with new books, so I looked up the few contemporary authors I knew I liked, realized that some of them had been listed for something that's now called the Women's Prize, and I was like, great, a lifeline. I will take this. I'll read more books from this prize and go from there. It was a great entry point, and I then found the Booker, started paying more attention to the Pulitzer, yada yada. A few months later, I looked up a specific book and found that there were people talking about books on YouTube, which was a site I hadn't used very much. And if you self-selected into this video, this next bit probably happened to you too. I started watching more and more people, most of whom read new books, and suddenly I had something called a TBR or to be read list for the first time in my life, and that list got longer and longer. I just couldn't differentiate. When a passionate person got on camera and talked about a book they liked, I then wanted to read that book because there wasn't really anything that I could call my taste to speak of. I was still developing my taste. But I had a sense early on that I wanted to be a part of the publishing world, so I moved back to the US and eventually got a job working as a foreign rights literary agent. So I was selling American and Canadian books into foreign markets. Typically an author has an agent before they're ever picked up by an editor and have a publishing house behind them. So a lot of my reading was fresh manuscripts. We're talking Word documents that would go on to be books in a few years. And the rest of my reading, for the most part, was new releases because I had to know what was selling, what was generating buzz, where the trends were headed. When it came to selling my own list, I had to know what I could use as comparison titles or comp titles as they're called in the industry. I listened to book podcasts, I read a lot of reviews, I was in it. Then I left the publishing industry and went to grad school, and after a year or so, something had happened. I'd walk into a bookstore and I wouldn't recognize the books on the display tables, even a lot of the author names. Didn't know them. I didn't have that interconnected story of, oh, I saw that on so-and-so's channel, or, oh, that's this person who's represented by this agency and it's their third novel. There was so much less of that going on in my brain space, and in some ways, nature was healing. And it made me feel like many people feel when they walk into a bookstore, which is overwhelmed and indecisive. I felt like all these bright covers with their bold fonts were shouting at me. I'd gingerly read the inside flaps and be like, oh God, how can every book be a haunting, important work for our times? This is not helpful. And now I've been out of the game for a few years and I don't miss the new releases hamster wheel because I want to read my TBR. I want to read across time periods. I want to read books that probably won't sell well but that excite me. And I already have my own new releases priorities, especially titles from Central and Eastern Europe. As a consequence, I only have the foggiest idea of which books were the anointed books of 2024. So let's get into these lists with some important context first. I do have something that could be called personal taste now, but I've been surprised too many times not to have some flexibility there when I'm assessing a new book. But I'm not really assessing a new book to see if I want to read it. There has to be something that calls to me that makes me want to read that book despite myself. I'm happy to find a reason not to read something and move on, which means there's not going to be a super well-considered thought process for each of these books. I'm responding more like an average reader, a reader who has some industry insights, and I'm sure those will come up. But what I mean is that I have no external motivation to read these, and I feel no personal obligation to either. So I'm going to be going on instinct, as incomplete and unjust as that can be. If you see a book you really enjoyed on here and I say, don't like the cover, not for me, I can see how that would be annoying. And you're very welcome to comment on the books you liked and to make a case for them regardless of what I say. That's probably what I would do if the situation were reversed. But I'm allowing myself to come on here and be a mercurial, at times unreasonable reader who already has a healthy TBR and not a lot of time. Also, let's be real, the best way to figure out if you vibe with a book is to go into your library or a bookstore and read a few pages. But I don't really like online browsing in that way because spending time on Amazon kills my mood. I'm using the publisher's lunch list. Pub Lunch is an email blast you can sign up for that tells you on an almost daily basis about new book deals and current events in the industry. And they say, every year we aggregate selective titles from all over, critics, retailers, libraries, major awards, trade magazines, readers, and more, to put together the definitive consensus list of the year's very best books. So these are the titles that appeared across the most lists at the end of the year. As we go through, my categories are will read soon or soon-ish, will read eventually, pretty good chance of reading, and strong maybe. Any books below that cutoff won't be categorized, so let's do this. Okay, it looks like there are exactly 10 titles here. I know they try to do a top 10, but sometimes ties make it longer. All right, the first book is James by Percival Everett, and this is going on my will read eventually list. It's a reimagining of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Everett is a writer I've heard about for years, but he hasn't really had his moment in the sun, I think, at least not commercially. And this one really was the book of 2024. I'm putting it on a will definitely read list because my sister's boyfriend already got me a copy of both James and Huckleberry Finn. He's a keeper. But I'm not going to read it soon-ish because I want to read Huck Finn first. This is kind of a know thyself situation though, because if you have this idea that you might read Huck Finn and then you'll read James, but then the fact that you actually never get to Huck Finn means you never get to James, just read the Everett in that case, you know, and then see if you want to go back to the Twain. But I know myself and I know I will read both and I know I prefer them in this order. Also, last note on this is that I think I'll be more likely to do this if I make it part of a slightly bigger project. Not like months and months worth of reading, but if I just say that eventually I want to read Huck Finn and then James, it makes me less likely to do that soon than if I said, okay, I actually want to take this opportunity to read a few American classics that are on my like most egregious haven't read yet list. So let's say I did Their Eyes Were Watching God, As I Lay Dying, and Huck Finn. I think I could have a lot of fun with that. And then end up reading James. Okay, the next one is Martyr! By Kaveh Akbar. I've seen this in bookstores and I've had friends say that they're glad it's gotten this level of recognition, but I don't really know anything about it. Wow, this has really been reviewed everywhere. Clint Smith blurb, Lauren Groff blurb, Tommy Orange, Mary Carr, Leslie Jameson, Raven Leilani. This person has an MFA, and they probably also teach writing at an MFA program. Let's look it up. Okay, Akbar received his MFA from Butler University and his PhD in creative writing from Florida State University. Wonder if the Lauren Groff thing is a Florida connection. And he's taught at both Purdue and now the University of Iowa. There we go. Now, I thought this because you don't get these types of blurbs without connections. It's not some nefarious thing, and I'm not saying that these people don't mean what they're writing or that he's not deserving of all this praise, but you don't get this kind of support from fellow writers unless you yourself are involved in the writing community, is what I'm saying. Any J.D. Salingers of today are not getting blurbs like this from their fellow writers. There's also certain things you learn as you go along, like for example, if George Saunders has blurbed something from a new writer, that writer probably came out of the Syracuse MFA program because that's where Saunders teaches. Again, still a huge accomplishment to have Saunders notice and recommend you from that program, right? I would feel amazing about myself if that happened. But it's usually not a situation where it's like, oh, George Saunders read this random debut novel and he just loved it so much that he felt compelled to write a recommendation for it. Anyway, what is this book even about? A newly sober orphaned son of Iranian immigrants, guided by the voices of artists, poets, and kings, embarks on a remarkable search for a family secret. I'm not feeling a specific pull, and I also think if this were a me book, that my friends who have read it would have told me that. But it seems like Akbar has a poetry background. That's really cool to have that infused in his fiction, I'm sure. Next is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore, and I'm not going to open the description because I know I want to read this just based on the vibes. I've been aware of Liz Moore for a few years since her book The Unseen World, which was big on BookTube. I still would like to read that one, honestly, but I know that this one has not disappointed people who already loved her, and it's brought a lot of new people to her books. Being superficial, it has a great cover. I even like this font, which I wouldn't normally like in other contexts. This book is supposed to be mysterious, reads quickly. into this. I think this does illustrate something, that if I've been aware of an author's work and then they have a book that's even bigger than their previous ones, and I like the vague sound of that book that reaches me through cultural osmosis, that can be the catalyst to be like, okay, I'm gonna do the Liz Moore thing now. Next is The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley, and the cover is I'm not going to read it. One of Barack Obama's favorite books of 2024. Try not to hold that against it. I'm not too cynical about this. I believe that Obama really does read and enjoy the books he recommends, but I also think he's trying to be hip with the kids, and I'm not hip or a kid. Witty, sexy, escapist fiction that packs a substantial punch. I like the witty, sexy, escapist fiction part. That's very effective, but I don't know if we need to use the phrase packs a punch in any form of writing ever. Utterly winning. Readers, I envy you. There's a smart, witty novel in your future. I haven't read Vanity Fair yet, Ron. Envy me that. A time travel romance, a spy thriller, a workplace comedy, and an ingenious exploration of the nature of power and the potential for love to change it all. That's confusing. That's very confusing, right? Oh, my mind feels scrambled. I'm not trying to say this should be more simplistic, because I think writers can feel pressured to streamline their influences, but when I'm approaching this for the first time, I genuinely have no idea what any of that means. I don't know why I'm still reading this description. It's not coming back from this. Is this the debut though? Oh, it is! That's really exciting. What a moment for this author. That's fantastic. Sorry that it's not having a moment here on my channel. Okay, then we have All Fours by Miranda July, and this is going on my, wait, let me look at my own categories again. This is going on pretty good chance of reading because I've gotten a personalized recommendation from a friend. My friend Claire from Claire Reads Books enjoyed this, and she told me about it, and it's hard to resist Claire's descriptions. Seems to be about a woman's midlife crisis, maybe, and it seems like the type of book I could get through quickly. I only mention that because I read a lot of bigger books or very dense books or very depressing books, and so the idea of changing up my reading rhythm is really helpful, actually. All right, that's all I need to know. You're on the list, Miranda. The Women by Kristin Hannah. I'm not really a Kristin Hannah reader. Oh, it's interesting that this is taking place during the Vietnam War, although honestly, I think I've read enough Vietnam War from the perspective of Americans for a lifetime. I would like to read more Vietnamese books, although it's always good to reread the things they carried, to be honest. See, you're not just competing with the other new books. That's the problem here. Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. Ugh, I've never gotten on the Kushner train. You know what it is? I read part of The Flamethrowers years ago when that was first getting really big. I read about 100 pages of it, and her writing style just didn't really gel with me. There's clearly something here. People whose tastes I respect think very highly of Rachel Kushner, but after that experience, it's just kind of like, there's never been any spark. I'm kind of happy for this just to be an author who's not for me. And if a future book comes out where my friends specifically say, even if you don't like Rachel Kushner, this is the Rachel Kushner book to try, then I'll read that one. But until then, nah. All right, Colored Television by Danzy Senna. The neon of the cover does stress me out, so if I were to read this, I would have to get an ebook. Funny, foxy, and fleet, says Dwight Garner for the New York Times. I'm not trying to make too much of this because obviously these words are taken out of context, but that is a little funny to me. Wouldn't funny and fleet be better alone? I really like that, actually. Funny and fleet. Sorry, I do get caught up on these things, and I know that's not helpful in terms of the books themselves. Oh, Los Angeles / Hollywood book. That's a major strike for me. Not feeling the pull. She's a previous book called Caucasia, though. Great title. Laugh out loud cultural comedy. Feeling nothing. Let me look this author up though. Danzy Senna. Spouse, Percival Everett. Power couple. Next is Funny Story by Emily Henry, and I'm not an Emily Henry reader because when I read romance, I like historical romance, especially Regency romance. And honestly, if I were to expand my romance readings, I'd be looking to get into more Black historical romance writers. But if you like Emily Henry, feel free to tell me why, and she'll definitely be on my radar if I get into contemporary romances. Lastly, but not leastly, we have Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I read both Conversations with Friends and Normal People when they were really starting to gather steam, and I had a great time with both. Then Beautiful World, Where Are You came out, and there was nothing about it that sounded interesting to me. And I think something can happen where when you fall off the train with an author, it then can be really hard to get back on the train. Or not hard, but it's like you've lost that momentum. I really liked Sally Rooney's books, but I didn't think they were these earth-shattering, groundbreaking things. I'm sure Sally Rooney herself agrees with me when it comes to those earlier two books. Again, nothing to do with the author herself, but I think the Sally Rooney-ification of what publishers are looking for in young women writers and how they want to market them is a little unfortunate. I am more drawn to this story though than I was to Beautiful World, Where Are You? Two brothers after their father's death. They have very different responses to it. I do like a brother's story, and a few people have said to me that they actually think that Rooney writes men better than she writes women. I could see myself, if there's a future Rooney book that does really specifically interest me, if I read that one and enjoy it, then I could go back to this one. That was the fiction list. Okay. For my own categories, I have Will Read Soon, The God of the Woods, Will Read Eventually, James, and pretty good chance of reading all fours. On to nonfiction. There are 16 books on here. It looks like there are a few ties that got us to that point. Here are the questions I'm always asking myself when I approach a top nonfiction books list. Where is history? Where is biography? Where is science? Where is nature writing? And on a lot of nonfiction lists, the answer is nowhere to be found. Or they'll have like a token science book, maybe one history book, but overall it'll be the type of list that makes you wonder if anybody on their staff is really a serious and passionate nonfiction reader, or is it all essay collections from people who already write essays for major outlets, or memoirs, or books that are on issues that are currently being addressed in the news. So what type of nonfiction list will this be? I think we know the answer to that. There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension, which is an essay collection by Hanif Abdurraqib. I've heard great things about this, but that foreign rights part of me is being activated here, because when I look at this, I think this could get all the praise from the American market in the world. The basketball component is going to make it tough for foreign sales. There's going to be a few places where basketball is also big, like maybe you'd get a Serbian deal out of this, but I don't know, it's tough. You know what I would do actually with this one? Because I'm confident that it is a good reading experience based on other people's reviews, I might get it as a gift at some point for my twin brother. I think my brother would really like this, and then he can read it and he can tell me if I should read it. I know it's kind of weird to be like, I wouldn't read it myself, but I would gift it. That's just how it goes sometimes. Oh, an Adam Higginbotham book. He wrote Midnight in Chernobyl, which I've read, and his newest one is on the Challenger explosion. This is a little bit hypocritical, but I think it ultimately makes sense. As most of you know, I focus on Central and Eastern European studies, and that includes a lot of reading about very traumatic events. And I don't mind that, and it doesn't generally take a toll on me or anything. And maybe I can say that and feel that way because I'm not from the region and my family didn't survive the Holodomor, for example. But I think because so much of that part of my reading is very intense and very dark, when it comes to other areas, I'm not necessarily looking for that in my nonfiction. Like, I don't want to read the backstories of all 7 members of the crew to get attached to them to know the horrible way that they died. I can see why this is a big book though, and I do trust Higginbotham with a topic like this. So if you've read it, please do let me know your thoughts. Oh, we got a Rushdie. Knife is on the best books of the year list. I just have no personal connection to Rushdie's books because I've never read him. These are reflections on the stabbing that he survived, and I've had multiple friends tell me that this is excellent, and they're not big Rushdie readers either. I just feel in this moment like I'm not emotionally overcoming my distance from everything that he's written. So honestly, the way I would probably end up reading this is if someone gifted it to me. I think I would really like it. In the context of everything else, I can't bring myself to put it on the list. I don't know what to tell you. The Light Eaters, How the Unseen World of Plant Intelligence Offers a New Understanding of Life on Earth by Zoe Schlanger. Love a Zoe with an umlaut. This cover is interesting to me because I think it's subtly coded for both male and female readers. I wouldn't be surprised if they were trying to meet in the middle with this design. The Light Eaters is a deep immersion into the drama of green life and the complexity of this wild and awe-inspiring world that challenges our very understanding of agency, consciousness, and intelligence. Oh no. I love most of that. It's specifically the word agency that's causing this reaction because one of my friends from my grad school program, she's deep in the anthropology world, and we were having a discussion once where she was getting into the fact that a coat hanger has agency. And that was the moment where I was like, I can't follow you to a point where I'm discussing the agency of a coat hanger. But I guess plants are pretty far from coat hangers in their agency, consciousness, and intelligence, although maybe my classmate would disagree with me. This looks fascinating. It really does. All right, it's going on strong, maybe. Okay, next is Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here, the United States, Central America, and the Making of a Crisis. Great topic. Wow. Not to make fun of it and then be myself, like, this is an important book, but this does seem like an important book. This really has gotten reviewed in the big places. We have a John Stewart blurb, Patrick Radden Keefe, Joe Lepore blurb. This person writes for the New Yorker. I would bet you anything. Let's look this up. Jonathan Blitzer. Staff writer at the New Yorker. I was picking up a vibe. I'm not going to put it on my list though, but I think actually the way that I would end up reading this book is, again, if I did some sort of a project. Reading it randomly in isolation, probably not a thing for me. But if I wanted to read multiple books all about Central America and maybe one from a Spanish language perspective and then 2 or 3 others where this would be one of them, give myself like a little reading unit, that's really attractive to me. That makes me more likely to read this. Note to self. The Barn, The Secret History of a Murder in Mississippi. If we're talking about murder in Mississippi, oh, is this going to be a lynching? Oh no. Wright Thompson's family farm in Mississippi is 23 miles from the site of one of the most notorious and consequential killings in American history. Oh, it's an Emmett Till book. Yeah. It's really tough for me to even think about Emmett Till, to be honest. Like the Challenger book, this is going under the category of I can't read this and also read about Eastern Europe. It's interesting the way they're framing this though, because with the title, the subtitle, and a large part of the description, they're not actually mentioning Emmett Till. So I think they're trying to defamiliarize this a little bit. And I like that as a project for this author. Good cover too, but it's making my skin crawl, as it should. Robin Wall Kimmerer's The Serviceberry. Isn't this the Braiding Sweetgrass author? Yes, it is. What's really cool about that is it's a book from Milkweed Editions, and Milkweed is a small independent publisher, and they really do take a chance on a lot of authors. So the fact that Braiding Sweetgrass got so big, it just makes me think about the funding opportunities for other authors now for them to continue taking chances on people. I'm looking through this description though, and I still haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass, so I would probably read that one before I read this one. Hugh the Sun, The Invention of Reality TV by Emily Nussbaum. I saw this on Jill's channel at the Book Bully, and I really liked the way she described it. I am a reality TV watcher myself, especially The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. I'm a Heather Gay apologist. Like Abdurraqib's book though, this is going on my list of something I would gift to a family member, specifically my sister. She has a topic that she reads a lot from in terms of nonfiction. She reads about the suffrage movement. But other than that, I think she would like a quick, fun, and interesting nonfiction book. And I think she already likes this author's articles. That's going on my potential gifting list before I read it myself. What is that I spy? Is that a history title? The Wide, Wide Sea, Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook by Hampton Sides. I was going to make some kind of a comment about having a name like Hampton means that you're going to write a nautical book, but I am sure that this author has dealt with nothing but commentary on his name his whole life. In this masterly history, Sides tracks the 18th century English naval officer James Cook's third and final voyage across the globe, painting a vivid and propulsive portrait that blends generations of scholarship with the first-hand accounts of European seafarers, as well as the oral traditions of indigenous Pacific Islanders. Oh, this is interesting. This is going on the strong maybes. Madness, Race and Insanity in a Jim Crow Asylum by Antonia Hilton. So this seems to be using the history of one of the nation's last segregated asylums to talk more broadly about the history of Black mental health and the treatment of Black mental health patients. And that is a great topic. I'm not feeling as drawn to this as to the ones that are already strong maybes, so it's not going to be on the list today. That is a great topic though. I already feel that kind of like expanding my thought process a little bit, even just having read that description. Be You Ready When the Luck Happens? A memoir by Ina Garten. I am not an Ina Garten follower in any capacity, so this is not going on my list. And it's cute actually. I can tell that the description is written in this very personable voice, and it's directed towards somebody who's already a big follower of Ina Garten. For example, it says, in her unmistakable voice, no one tells a story like Ina. So that's not for me, but it is effective at what it's trying to do for its audience. The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is going on my will read eventually. I like Coates as a thinker. I enjoy feeling my thoughts bounce off against his. In this book, he goes to Senegal, South Carolina, and Palestine. Yeah, I remember with Between the World and Me, I took issue with the way he framed certain things or didn't follow some of his rhetoric, but I just liked that book as a thought exercise. And I also, of course, thought he made a lot of great points. I guess what I'm saying is that I really admire Coates, but without that level of adulation that a lot of people feel toward him. And honestly, based on his whole vibe, I think that's how he would prefer to be read. When the Clock Broke, Con Men, Conspiracists, and How America Cracked Up in the Early 1990s. No. Title, no. Cover, no. Don't know the author. A revelatory look back at the convulsions at the end of the Reagan era. Convulsions indeed. Oh God. no, no. I was born in the early 90s and I'm not going back. I Heard Her Call My Name, a memoir of transition by Lucy Sant. For a long time, Lucy Sant felt unsure of her place. Born in Belgium, the only child of conservative working-class Catholic parents who transplanted their little family to the United States, she felt at home only when she moved to New York City in the early 1970s. That is a tough background to come from, well, for a lot of people, but for a little trans girl, that's really tough. The only child of conservative Catholic parents. I like the description here a lot. I'm not feeling a specific draw to it, but I like having this kind of on my general radar. Also, the cover's great. I don't necessarily love what they're doing with the text and the background of the text, but the image is striking and they are presenting it to advantage. I think this is a really effective cover. Our second to last book is Grief is for People by Sloane Crosley, and this is the second book that's going on the will read soon list. That's for two main reasons. One, I've been interested in Crosley's writing for a while, but I've never read her. And two, the specific description of this is hitting. She typically writes humorous essays, but this is about the death of her friend. This has been on my radar. I do want to read it. I'm going to read it. And then finally, on the nonfiction list, we have another memoir. It's called Whiskey Tender by Deborah Jackson Taffa. I'm looking up how to say this tribe's name correctly. I want to get this right if I can. Quitsan. Interesting. Okay. See, this is why I look it up, because I wouldn't have guessed that. Okay. Also, of course, further corrections are welcome, but it says that she was raised to believe some sacrifices were necessary to achieve a better life. Her grandparents, citizens of the Quetsan Nation and Laguna Pueblo tribe, were sent to Indian boarding schools run by white missionaries, and she reflects on her past and present, the promise of assimilation, and the many betrayals her family has suffered, both personal and historical. This same friend that I mentioned who was in my program and who's interested in anthropology, she herself is Native American. We both took a class that was on post-colonialism and post-communism, but she's especially interested in the phenomenon of settler colonialism, which essentially is talking about cases like the US and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and we both would argue Siberia, where you can't call them post-colonial in the way that a country like India is, for example, because the colonizers never left. This looks great. Oh God, I wish I had more time to read all of these books. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling a little pull. This is going on the strong maybes. Did we do it? Is that it? Yes. Okay. So here are the final books that made it onto these lists. Will Read Soon or Soon-ish, The God of the Woods, and Grief is for People. Will Read Eventually, James and the Message. Pretty good chance of reading, All Fours. And strong maybes are The Light Eaters, The Wide Wide Sea, and Whiskey Tender. I hope you got something out of my process, even if it was just to recognize and appreciate how different your process and your preferences are. Thank you for watching. I have 2 more videos in the works for this little winter season of mine, so hopefully I'll see you back here soon for another video. I mean, I'll be here. I don't know if you'll be here. It would be great if you were. Okay.